The first clash. The morning sun spilled golden light across the glass towers of the city, painting them in a glow that looked almost too perfect to belong to the world Emma Rodriguez carried inside her heart. She stood on the sidewalk before Blackwood Industries, clutching her handbag with one hand and the strap of her daughter's school bag with the other. Just minutes earlier, she had dropped Sophia off at school with a kiss on her forehead and a whispered promise that everything would get better. At only 8 years old, Sophia already carried the quiet wisdom of someone who had seen her mother fight battles every single day. Since the divorce, Emma's world had turned into a constant race to make ends meet, and though she never spoke of her struggles aloud, her daughter could sense them. Today, standing before the towering building that housed the empire of Sebastian Blackwood, Emma felt the full weight of those struggles on her shoulders. She knew the stories, she knew the warnings. People said that working as his secretary was like walking into the lion's den without armor, and no one had lasted. But Emma was not walking in for pride, or for ambition, or to prove herself to anyone. She was walking in for her daughter, and that gave her a stubborn fire no storm could put out. The revolving doors spun as she entered, her heels clicking against marble so polished she could see her own reflection. The lobby stretched wide and tall, modern and intimidating, with sharp lines and muted colors that screamed both wealth and power. The receptionist, a young woman whose eyes already looked tired though it was barely morning, gave Emma a look filled with unspoken warnings. "You must be the new assistant," the receptionist said softly, sliding a visitor badge toward her. "42nd floor. Human Resources is expecting you." Her voice carried no joy, only resignation, as if she had already written Emma's fate before the story even began. Emma straightened her blazer, nodded politely, and pressed the elevator button. The ride felt endless, each floor a reminder that she was climbing higher into the storm. She closed her eyes briefly, whispering her daughter's name in her mind like a prayer. Sophia. It was her anchor, her reason. By the time the doors opened, her heartbeat had steadied. Human Resources Director Janet Walsh greeted her with kind eyes, but kindness laced with concern. Janet was in her 50s, with gray streaks in her hair and the calm presence of someone who had seen far too many hopeful assistants crumble under Sebastian Blackwood's impossible standards. "Miss Rodriguez," she said as they walked down the executive hall, "I feel obligated to warn you. Mr. Blackwood is exceptionally demanding. He doesn't tolerate mistakes, not even small ones. The last assistant was dismissed for using a blue pen instead of black. The one before her was dismissed for speaking too loudly during a phone call." She sighed. 18 assistants in 1 year. You should know what you are walking into. Emma met her eyes with quiet determination. "I appreciate the warning," she said, "but I need this position. I'll manage." Janet paused in front of a large office with glass walls and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "He's in a meeting until 11. Your desk is here," she said, pointing to the elegant workstation placed strategically outside his door. "Your login credentials are in the drawer. Familiarize yourself with his calendar. And good luck." Her voice softened on the last words, as if she doubted Emma would last long enough for luck to matter. Alone, Emma placed her bag down and opened the computer. The screen glowed with his calendar, meetings, calls, travel schedules, every minute, accounted for. She scanned the details, noting the ruthless precision. Coffee at 10:57, board meeting at 11 sharp, call with investors at 1. Everything in his life looked like a battlefield where timing was the weapon. She typed carefully, memorizing the system, determined not to make mistakes. At exactly 11, the elevator chimed. The air seemed to shift as Sebastian Blackwood stepped out. Emma looked up, her breath catching before she forced herself back into control. He was taller than his photo suggested, with dark hair perfectly styled, sharp features carved with intensity, and a presence that seemed to command the very space he walked through. His tailored charcoal suit fit him with effortless perfection, his movements carrying the confidence of a man who owned not just the company, but the world around him. He walked directly to his office, only to stop when he found the door locked. "You must be the latest candidate," he said. his voice deep and controlled like steel wrapped in velvet carrying an edge that could cut glass. He didn't smile, didn't soften, only assessed her as if she were another tool he would either use or discard. Emma stood quickly, extending her hand with calm professionalism. "Emma Rodriguez, Mr. Blackwood. I'm pleased to be working with you?" For a moment his eyes flicked to her hand, then back to her face. He didn't take it. Instead, he unlocked his door with swift efficiency and said, "We'll see how long that pleasure lasts." Without another word, he disappeared into his office, leaving the door slightly ajar. Emma sat down again, refusing to let the sting of his dismissal shake her. She reminded herself of her daughter's smile, of the little lunchbox she had packed that morning, of the bills waiting at home. She could take his arrogance. She had faced worse storms. The next few hours unfolded like a test designed to break her. Sebastian barked orders through the intercom without looking up from his desk. "Coffee, black. Exactly 2 sugars. No cream. 5 minutes." She delivered it on time, steady-handed, ignoring the way he barely acknowledged her effort. "Schedule, a call with Tokyo. Midnight their time. I don't care if it's inconvenient for you." She nodded, adjusting the schedule without hesitation. Each task was thrown like a weapon, sharp and fast, but Emma met each one with quiet precision. At noon, he emerged from his office for the first time holding a folder. His gaze fell on her desk. This report was printed in double-sided format. I never read double-sided. His voice carried no anger, only the calm cruelty of a man who expected the world to bend to his will. Emma met his eyes. "I'll fix it immediately, sir." She took the folder, reprinted the pages single-sided, and handed them back within minutes. For the first time, his gaze lingered, as if assessing whether she would complain, whether she would break like the others. But Emma simply returned to her desk, her posture firm, her expression calm. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. The day stretched long. Every hour felt like a battlefield where silence was her armor and precision her weapon. By the time 5 o'clock arrived, the office floor had emptied, leaving only Emma at her desk and Sebastian still inside his office, the light under his door casting long shadows. At 6, he finally emerged, his tie loosened, his expression tired but no less sharp. He glanced at her, surprised she was still there. Most assistants leave the moment the clock strikes 5. Emma met his gaze steadily. Most assistants don't last a month. Something flickered in his eyes, something unspoken, but he didn't reply. Instead, he walked past her toward the elevator. As the doors closed behind him, Emma exhaled slowly, letting the tension of the day melt into her bones. She had survived the first clash, and though Sebastian Blackwood was every bit the tyrant she had been warned about, Emma Rodriguez had no intention of leaving. For her daughter, for herself, she would fight through every storm. What Emma didn't know was that in the silence of his office, Sebastian had paused for the briefest moment after her words. "Most assistants don't last a month." She had said it without fear, without apology, and something about that stirred an unfamiliar curiosity in him. He brushed it aside, telling himself she was no different from the others. But deep down, a seed had been planted, one he could not ignore forever. That night, as Emma tucked Sophia into bed, her daughter asked softly, "How was your first day, Mama?" Emma smiled, smoothing the blanket. "It was hard," she admitted, "but I'm not going anywhere. We're going to be okay." Sophia's small arms wrapped around her. "I knew you'd be strong." And in that moment, Emma realized that no matter how cruel her boss might be, no matter how impossible his demands, she had already won the only battle that mattered, being strong enough for the little girl who believed in her. The Battle of Wills. The next morning, Emma woke before dawn. The city outside still wore its blanket of quiet darkness, but her apartment was alive with the soft clatter of breakfast preparations and the hum of determination. Sophia sat at the kitchen table, swinging her legs and humming as she ate toast with jam. "You look nervous, Mama," she said between bites. Emma smiled, though her heart felt like a fist pounding against her chest. Maybe a little. But sometimes, being nervous means you're about to do something important. She brushed her daughter's hair back and tied it neatly before helping her into her school sweater. Sophia was the anchor that kept her from sinking into fear. Every time she thought of Sebastian Blackwood's sharp words from yesterday, she reminded herself that no storm was bigger than the one she had already survived, walking away from. A broken marriage with nothing but her child and her will to fight. By 8 o'clock, Emma was seated at her new desk outside Sebastian's office. She had arrived 30 minutes early, not because he had demanded it, but because she refused to be caught unprepared. She had studied his schedule the night before, memorized his calendar, even practiced the coffee order until she could make it in her sleep. If he thought he could scare her off with impossible demands, he was wrong. The elevator chimed at exactly 8:30. Sebastian stepped out, as precise as his calendar. His suit was navy today, his tie a darker shade of blue, his expression unreadable. He walked toward his office without a glance at her, but his voice cut through the air like a blade. "My coffee. 10 minutes. Don't be late." Emma was already on her feet. She placed the cup on his desk at the 9th minute. Exactly 2 sugars, no cream, hot and steady. He glanced at it, lifted it to his lips and paused. For the first time, he looked directly at her, his dark eyes narrowing slightly. "It's the right temperature." "Of course," she said evenly. Most people would have taken his words as a compliment. Emma recognized them as a test. He was waiting for her to stumble, waiting for her to apologize for something she hadn't done wrong. Instead, she met his gaze with calm silence. After a moment, he set the cup down and turned back to his papers. The morning unraveled into chaos, disguised as routine. Sebastian dictated 3 letters at once, switching topics mid-sentence without warning. He barked instructions into his phone while signaling for Emma to take notes on a completely different matter. He expected her to know which file he needed before he finished asking. Any lesser assistant would have been flustered, scrambling to keep up. But Emma's hands moved across the keyboard with practiced speed, her eyes sharp as she pulled files from digital folders she had already memorized. When he demanded a contract from 6 months ago, she slid it onto his desk before he finished the sentence. His eyebrow lifted slightly at her precision, but he said nothing. By noon, word had already spread through the office. Employees passing by whispered to one another, peeking curiously at the new secretary. "She's still here?" someone muttered, near the copier. By day 2 last time, the last girl was in tears. Another shook her head. "Let's see how long she lasts. He'll break her too." Emma heard the whispers, but she didn't flinch. She had no time to entertain doubt. She worked through lunch, answering calls, typing letters, preparing schedules. At one point, Sebastian strode out with a list of instructions so long it nearly filled a page. "Boardroom at 2. Investor packet ready. Flight booked for Tokyo. And reschedule my meeting with Carter. I don't care how you do it. Just do it." He turned and left without waiting for a response. Emma took a deep breath and rolled up her sleeves. The clock ticked mercilessly, but she refused to let panic set in. One by one, she tackled the tasks, printing and binding investor packets, arranging his travel itinerary, contacting Carter's office and negotiating a rescheduled meeting slot. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, and yet she stayed steady. When Sebastian returned at 1:59, everything was ready on the table. He stopped mid-step, his eyes scanning the neatly stacked packets. For the briefest moment, his expression softened into something unreadable, something almost human. But then it vanished, replaced by his usual icy composure. "You did your job," he said simply. Emma bit back the retort that rose in her chest. "Yes, I did my job, but better than anyone else ever did." She swallowed the words and only nodded. She had nothing to prove to him with speeches. Her actions were her weapon. That evening, when the office emptied once again, Emma was still at her desk, reviewing tomorrow's schedule. She could feel Sebastian's gaze on her as he stepped out of his office. "You're still here," he said, his tone unreadable. I need to make sure tomorrow runs smoothly, she replied. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. His sharp eyes searched hers as if trying to decipher what made her different. Most assistants had fled by now, broken or furious. Emma only sat with calm determination, her posture straight, her eyes unwavering. You're stubborn, he said, finally, his voice low. She allowed herself the faintest smile. It helps. He didn't reply, but as he turned toward the elevator, a thought lingered in his mind like an echo he couldn't shake. This one might actually last. That night, Emma returned home exhausted, her body aching from the endless hours. But when she walked through the door and Sophia ran into her arms, the weight lifted. You're home, Mama, the little girl exclaimed, her face lighting up. Did you win today? Emma laughed softly, kissing her daughter's cheek. I think I survived. And sometimes surviving is the same as winning. As Sophia drifted to sleep later that night, Emma sat by her bedside, watching her small chest rise and fall. In the quiet, she thought about Sebastian Blackwood, his sharpness, his impossible demands, his eyes that seemed to look through her instead of at her. He was everything she should despise, and yet somewhere deep inside she felt a strange shift. He had tested her, pushed her, and she hadn't broken. Instead, she had found strength she hadn't known she carried. Emma didn't realize it yet, but Sebastian was beginning to notice the same. Breaking walls, Emma arrived on the third week of her employment at Blackwood Industries, with the same calm determination that had carried her through every day since her first. Her navy blazer was pressed, her hair neatly tied back, her heels steady on the polished floors. Yet beneath the surface, her world was anything but steady. Bills still piled up at home, and her daughter Sophia needed more of her time than Emma could give. Still, she had learned something in the weeks since she first faced Sebastian Blackwood. She could endure him, and not only endure, but succeed in a way no one else had managed. The whispers in the office had changed. No longer were they about how soon she would leave, or how quickly she would break. Now they carried a different edge, one of surprise and curiosity. She's lasted 3 weeks, one employee muttered as Emma passed. No one's ever made it this far. Another shook her head. I don't get it. He's impossible. How is she still standing? Emma ignored the whispers, focusing instead on her tasks. Each morning she arrived before Sebastian, memorizing his schedule, anticipating his needs, and carrying out her work with precision. But what set her apart was not just her skill, it was her refusal to cower before him. When he barked an order, she answered calmly. When he tried to catch her off guard, she stayed 2 steps ahead. And though he never admitted it aloud, Sebastian had begun to notice. One afternoon, as Emma typed up a financial report, Sebastian stepped out of his office holding a stack of files. His expression was sharp, his tone brisk. Rodriguez, my meeting with the Tokyo investors is at 9 tomorrow morning. I need a full report on their last quarter, projected growth, and any risks. Prepare it by tonight. Emma glanced at the clock. It was already 6. She could feel exhaustion pressing at the edges of her mind, but she nodded calmly. You'll have it on your desk before you leave, sir. He studied her for a moment, as if expecting protest. When none came, he gave a curt nod and returned to his office. By 9 o'clock, Emma had gathered every piece of data, formatted it into a clean report, and slipped it onto his desk. When he returned to check, he flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning quickly. His jaw tightened, but not with anger, with something else. This is thorough, he said finally. Accurate. You anticipated questions I hadn't even considered. Thank you, she said simply. For the first time since she had met him, there was no edge in his tone. It wasn't praise exactly, but it wasn't criticism either. It was acknowledgement, and though he quickly masked it, Emma noticed. The next morning, Sebastian left for his meeting, and the office felt unusually quiet without his constant presence. Emma took the chance to call Sophia's teacher, who had sent a note home about her daughter struggling in math. She's bright, the teacher said. But she's distracted. She worries too much. Emma's heart ached. Sophia carried the weight of her mother's struggles, even when Emma tried to hide them. That night, after she finished her work, Emma sat with her daughter at the kitchen table helping her with homework. Sophia looked up at her, her eyes wide and tired. "Do you have to work so much, Mama?" she asked softly. Emma brushed her hair back, forcing a smile. "For now, yes. But it's so I can give you a better life. One day all this will make sense." Sophia nodded, though her little face still carried worry. Emma kissed her forehead and tucked her into bed, whispering a promise that everything would be okay. The following week, something unexpected happened. Sebastian's sister, Claire, arrived, unannounced at the office. Unlike her brother, she was warm and approachable, with the same sharp features softened by an easy smile. She stopped at Emma's desk. "You must be the new assistant," she said brightly. "I'm Claire, and I have to say I'm impressed. Last time I came here, there was a different face." Emma smiled politely. "I've heard it's a difficult position." Claire laughed. "Difficult? That's a kind word for it. My brother doesn't make life easy for anyone, least of all his assistants." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "But I can see why you've lasted. You've got fire in your eyes. Don't lose that." Before Emma could reply, Sebastian emerged from his office. His eyes flicked to his sister, then to Emma. For a moment, something unreadable passed over his face. Was it annoyance or something else? "Claire," he said flatly, "what are you doing here?" "I came to see you," she said with a smile. "And maybe to meet the woman who's lasted longer than anyone else." Sebastian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He ushered his sister into his office, leaving Emma to wonder about the strange dynamic between them. Later that day, when Claire left, she paused at Emma's desk once more. "Don't let him scare you," she whispered with a wink. "Underneath all that ice, he's not as heartless as he looks." Emma didn't know whether to believe her, but the thought lingered in her mind long after Claire had gone. Over the next few days, Sebastian's behavior shifted almost imperceptibly. He still barked orders, still demanded perfection, but there were moments, small, fleeting moments, where his mask cracked. When Emma handed him a file, his fingers brushed hers, and instead of pulling away immediately, he hesitated for a fraction of a second. When she worked late, he sometimes paused at her desk on his way out, as if debating whether to speak. And once, when she coughed softly into her sleeve, he glanced up sharply and said, "You should take care of yourself. There's no one to replace you right now." The word startled her more than any insult ever had. It was the closest thing to concern she had heard from him. That night, as she lay in bed, Emma thought about him longer than she wanted to. She told herself it was only because he was changing the rules, because she needed to stay alert. But, deep inside, she knew it was something else. Sebastian Blackwood was beginning to see her not just as an assistant, but as something more. And Emma, despite all her walls, was beginning to see the man behind the reputation. The battle of wills was shifting into something neither of them had expected. Cracks in the armor. The winter rain poured over the city in silver sheets, streaking the wide glass windows of Blackwood Industries. Inside the 42nd floor, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Emma sat at her desk, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she tried to keep up with the chaos spilling from Sebastian's office. For the first time since she had started working there, the CEO himself seemed unsettled. His usual composure, cold, precise, and unshakable, was cracking. A deal with one of their biggest international partners was on the verge of collapsing. If it fell through, it wouldn't just cost the company millions, it would shatter the trust of their investors. "Rodriguez," Sebastian's voice cut sharply from his office, but there was an edge of strain in it Emma had never heard before. "Get me the Carter files, all of them, now." Emma was already moving, pulling the files she had neatly organized weeks ago. She stepped into his office, placing them on his desk without hesitation. He grabbed them, flipping through the pages, with a tight jaw. His tie was loosened, His usually perfect hair slightly mussed, his eyes hard as steel but lined with exhaustion. "They're threatening to pull out," he muttered more to himself than to her. "If they do, we lose the Tokyo contract too." Emma hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "What exactly are their concerns?" Sebastian looked up at her, surprised. No one in the company ever questioned him, let alone offered input. But Emma stood steady under his gaze. "Their concerns?" she repeated. He pushed a hand through his hair. "They claim we overpromised on delivery timelines. They're using it as leverage to renegotiate terms." Emma thought quickly, her mind pulling from every detail she had absorbed in the past weeks. "Didn't you just fast-track production in Chicago? If they knew about that, it might ease their doubts." Sebastian froze. He studied her, then the files, then back at her. Slowly, a spark of realization lit his eyes. "You're right." He grabbed the phone. "Get Carter on the line," he ordered, then paused. His eyes softened ever so slightly. "Stay." Emma blinked. He had never asked her to stay during one of his high-level calls. But she stayed. For the next hour she watched as Sebastian fought tooth and nail with words, negotiating with Carter's team, pushing back against their demands while carefully conceding where it mattered. And each time he glanced at Emma, she was there with a nod, a whispered suggestion, a reminder of the facts he might overlook in his frustration. Slowly, painfully, the tide turned. By the end of the call, Carter had agreed to revised but acceptable terms. The deal was saved. Sebastian dropped the phone onto the desk, exhaling sharply. For the first time, he looked human, tired, relieved. His shoulders sagged and he leaned back in his chair. Emma didn't speak. She simply waited, giving him space. Finally, he looked up at her. "You're not just an assistant," he said quietly. "You're the only reason that deal didn't collapse." Emma met his eyes, steady and calm. "You hired me to do a job. I'm just doing it." But he shook his head. "No, you're doing more." His voice softened, and something in his expression shifted, something she hadn't seen before. Gratitude, respect, maybe even something deeper. For a long moment, silence hung between them, heavy and charged. Emma felt her heartbeat quicken, but she forced herself to look away, gathering the empty coffee cup from his desk. "You should go home," she said gently. "You've been here since dawn." Sebastian gave a low laugh, one without his usual sharpness. "And what about you?" She allowed herself a small smile. "I'll survive. I always do." That night, long after she had gone home, Sebastian sat in his office staring at the city lights. He thought about her words, about the quiet strength in her eyes, about how she had stood beside him when no one else dared. He had built his empire on control, on never needing anyone. But Emma Rodriguez had just proven him wrong. The next day, the office buzzed with rumors. Everyone had heard about the Carter deal. Everyone whispered that Emma had been the one at his side through it all. Employees who once pitied her now looked at her with something closer to awe. At lunch, Claire dropped by again. She leaned against Emma's desk with a knowing smile. "I hear you saved the company yesterday," she teased. Emma flushed slightly. "I just did my job." Claire tilted her head. "Funny, my brother doesn't let anyone get that close to his work. You must be special." Before Emma could answer, Sebastian's door opened. His eyes flicked to his sister, then to Emma, and for the briefest second something unspoken passed between them. Claire caught it too. She smirked. "I'll leave you to it," she said, winking at Emma before walking away. Inside his office, Sebastian was different. Still sharp, still precise, but different. He asked for her input during meetings. He listened when she spoke. Once, when she dropped her pen and bent to pick it up, he beat her to it, handing it back with a rare, almost shy glance. The walls he had built around himself, walls of ice and arrogance, were beginning to crack, and Emma, against her will, was beginning to see the man behind them. One evening, as she packed her things to leave, he stopped her. "Rodriguez," he said softly. She turned, expecting another task. Instead, he hesitated. "You've lasted longer than anyone else. And it's not because you're stubborn, it's because you're strong." Emma's heart skipped, but she kept her voice calm. "Strength is all I have." He studied her, his dark eyes unreadable. Then, almost too quietly to hear, he said, "It's more than enough." That night, Emma walked home in the rain, her daughter's small hand tucked in hers. Sophia looked up at her, her smile as bright as the streetlights. "You're smiling, Mama," she said softly. Emma hadn't realized she was. And somewhere in the high tower of Blackwood Industries, Sebastian sat in his office, staring at the empty space outside his door where Emma had been, wondering for the first time in years what it would mean to let someone break through the armor he had built around his heart. The cracks had begun, and there was no going back. The fall and the rise. The spring air was warmer now, soft breezes sweeping through the city and carrying with them a sense of change. Emma felt it each morning as she walked into Blackwood Industries, her heels clicking, across the marble floors with the confidence of someone who had not only survived but thrived. She had lasted more than 2 months, longer than all 18 of her predecessors combined. But Emma knew something had shifted, not only in the way people looked at her, but in the way Sebastian Blackwood himself looked at her. His orders were still sharp, his standards still impossibly high, but the edges of his tone had softened. He no longer treated her as invisible. Instead, there were moments when his gaze lingered, when silence hung heavy between them, when words unsaid spoke, louder than the ones exchanged. Emma told herself it meant nothing. She reminded herself every night as she tucked Sophia into bed that her job was a means to survival, not a path to something else. But in the quiet spaces of her mind, she could not deny the truth. Sebastian Blackwood was no longer just her boss. He was becoming something more complicated, something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The turning point came on a Monday morning when disaster struck again. A major client accused Blackwood Industries of breaching contract. Lawyers were involved, the press was circling, and investors demanded answers. The board called an emergency meeting, and Sebastian, for all his confidence, looked more strained than Emma had ever seen him. "Rodriguez," he said as she handed him a stack of files. His voice was low, almost hoarse. "Stay close today. I need you." It was the first time he had ever admitted he needed anyone. In the boardroom, surrounded by executives and directors, Emma sat quietly at his side, taking notes, organizing documents, whispering reminders when necessary. She watched as Sebastian fought to hold the company together, his voice strong even as the weight pressed on his shoulders. And each time he faltered, her presence steadied him. At one point, when an investor questioned his integrity, Sebastian's jaw clenched tight. Emma leaned toward him, whispering just loud enough for him to hear. "Don't let them see doubt. You're stronger than this." Their eyes met. For a moment, the entire world seemed to fall away. He drew a breath, lifted his head, and answered the investor with renewed force. By the end of the day, the fire was contained. The company's reputation, though bruised, was safe. As the board members filed out, Sebastian remained seated, staring at the table in silence. Emma lingered, unsure if she should leave. Finally, he looked at her. His eyes, usually hard as stone, were raw. "I've built this company to be untouchable," he said quietly. "But today, the only reason it didn't collapse was you." Emma shook her head gently. "No, you fought for it. I just stood by you." "You don't understand," he said, his voice thick with something she had never heard before. Vulnerability. "I've spent my life pushing people away. I thought needing someone was weakness, but with you it doesn't feel like weakness. It feels like—" He stopped, searching for the words. "Like strength?" Emma's heart pounded. She wanted to speak, to dismiss it, to remind him of the boundaries between them. But the truth in his eyes silenced her. She turned away, gathering her papers quickly. "You should get some rest, Mr. Blackwood." Her voice trembled despite her effort to keep it steady. That night, as she tucked Sophia into bed, the little girl looked at her curiously. "Mama," she said softly, "why do you smile when you talk about your boss?" Emma froze. "I don't," she said quickly. "Yes, you do," Sophia insisted. "You say his name different, like he's important." Emma had no answer. She kissed her daughter's forehead, whispering good night. But as she lay awake later, she realized the truth. Sophia was right. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between Emma and Sebastian grew heavier, like a storm waiting to break. Every look lingered too long. Every conversation carried unspoken words, and every moment alone in his office felt like standing on the edge of something dangerous. One evening, after another grueling day, Emma gathered her things to leave, but as she reached the elevator, she heard his voice. "Emma." She turned. He rarely called her by her first name. He stood in the doorway of his office, his tie loosened, his eyes tired but burning with intensity. For a moment, he seemed at war with himself. Then he stepped closer. "You've changed everything," he said quietly. "You've changed me." Emma's breath caught. She wanted to deny it, to push him away, but the truth hung between them. She had seen the cracks in his armor, seen the man behind the ruthless CEO, and against all reason she had grown to care for him. "Sebastian," she began, but her voice faltered. He stepped closer, his voice low, almost pleading. "I don't want to be the man I was before. Not anymore. Not with you here." Emma's heart raced. She thought of Sophia, of the life she had fought to protect, of the risks that came with letting him in. Could she trust him? Could she trust herself? She looked into his eyes and saw not the tyrant CEO the world feared, but a man stripped bare, a man who had finally fallen. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. His gaze softened. "Then let me prove it to you." The weeks that followed were a slow transformation. Sebastian changed, not all at once, not perfectly, but in ways that mattered. He learned to listen, to soften his tone, to see the people around him not as tools, but as human beings. And at the heart of it all was Emma, guiding him without even trying, simply by being who she was. Sophia met him for the first time on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Emma had hesitated, but Sebastian insisted. When he knelt down to greet the little girl, offering her a gentle smile instead of his usual sharp command, Emma's heart shifted in ways she could no longer deny. Sophia, with the innocence of a child, accepted him without hesitation. "You make my mama smile," she said simply. Sebastian's eyes flicked to Emma, and in that moment, she knew. He had fallen. And despite every wall she had built, so had she. Months later, the city skyline glittered under the evening stars as Emma stood in the lobby of Blackwood Industries, watching Sebastian speak to his employees. He was still powerful, still confident, but different now. His words carried not just authority but respect, not just command but connection. When his eyes found hers across the room, a smile touched his lips. Not the cold smirk of the man she had first met, but the genuine warmth of the man he had become. Emma thought back to the day she had walked into this building for the first time. Terrified but determined, she had come for survival, for her daughter, never imagining she would find something more. Yet here she was, standing beside a man who had once been impossible, now transformed by the very thing he had feared most, love. And as Sophia ran into, her arms laughing, Emma realized that sometimes the fiercest battles lead to the most unexpected victories. The stubborn single mother had stood her ground, and the jerk CEO had fallen, not in defeat, but into something greater than either of them had ever known. Love had broken the walls, and together they would rise.